The worst and the best. It was 32 days after losing my father. I was in New York City and I needed to find Dominion. So I went to a place called Hadar, which is a community of young-ish people, mostly in their 20s and 30s, and I joined their minyan. I, no longer in my 20s or 30s myself, was one of the older people in the room. So when it came time for the Kaddish, I was surprised to hear two other voices. One was the sweet voice of a young woman. The other was the voice of a man who seemed to be about my age. When the service was over, I went to meet my fellow mourners. I learned that the young woman had lost her mother and had been mourning for 9 months, and that the man was there to mark his father's 4th yahrzeit. It was a month into saying Kaddish at that point, and I was already exhausted. So I turned to him for insight. Throughout the first year of mourning for your dad, were you able to recite the Kaddish daily? I asked. Every morning and every night, he said. And then he added, it was the worst year of my life. And looking back, it was also the best. I was confused, but he went on to explain. He hadn't been particularly religious or observant or engaged in Judaism before his father's death. But in that year, he said, I felt totally enveloped by the Jewish people. Wherever I was, I would find dominion, people to say amen to my prayers, and people that would care for me. I've never felt more connected to God, to the Jewish community, or to my dad, he shared. It was the worst and also the best. 5784 felt like it was the worst year of my life for sure. There is no part of me that would, in this moment of time, describe it also as the best. It was the worst in part because of losing my father. Like many of you know, your world changes when you lose someone who was a centerpiece of your life. My father died on June 19th. He was 80. After he died, many people asked if he had been sick. Not really, was my typical response, which still makes my husband and my father's doctor chuckle. I mean, yes, my dad had health issues with his kidneys, heart, neuropathy, and yes, he also had a growing lymphoma that we were not yet focusing on. So I guess, yes, sometimes he was sick. But he also wasn't sick because when he wasn't at dialysis or in the hospital, he was living a very full and a very beautiful life, spending time with friends, going to Connecticut for long weekends, playing cards at his favorite casinos, going to sports games and theater and movies and even traveling. And so I imagine that many of you understand what I mean when I say that he was sick and he also wasn't. My dad moved in with us 4.5 years ago when Westchester, New York became ground zero and the National Guard was heading in. I texted him at 12:30 at night, and my text said something like, it looks like you're in a danger zone. I'm going to drive up very early tomorrow and I'll pick you up and you'll stay with us until this passes, okay? So in my typical dad fashion, by the time I woke up, he was already in an Uber on his way from New York to Baltimore. So that 1 week turned into 4.5 years, which meant that my kids had another layer of perspective in their daily lives, and that we all had someone to cheer us on, guide us, advise us, laugh with us, hang out with us, try to coerce us into forgetting about our to-do lists and our schoolwork and our regular work, and to join him instead for TCBY, massages, movies, or dinners at any restaurant in town. My dad was a true competitor at his core. He lost rarely, and when he did, he recovered easily. That was true on the pitching mound, the racquetball court, in his furniture business, and in his career in the stock market. And even in his health setbacks, even when he had almost no chance of survival, he always recovered, almost miraculously. He always bounced back. And so, in May, when Dad sat in front of the fireplace on our big red chair with his cell phone in his hand and started calling friends, it did not seem like a big deal. He started calling one after another. "Hey, buddy," he would say. "I'm getting near the end. I don't have much longer," or some iteration of that news. He would then talk about the size of his lymphoma, thinking that this is what would ultimately bring him down. He told every person that he called, relatives, colleagues, mentees, and friends, that he loved them, that he was proud of them. And because my dad loved to have his calls on speaker, we heard them all crying as they told him how he had shaped them, helped them, guided them, and loved them into being, how he was another father to them all. My daughter Noah and I went into the kitchen, and we looked at each other with tears flowing down our cheeks, and we never, ever said a bad word about my dad. But we looked at each other in the kitchen, and we said, "Gramps is being a bit dramatic, don't you think?" And we meant it. He knew, but we didn't. We couldn't see it coming. And so I decided that day that we were going to take a break from all of the doctor's visits and big decisions that needed to be made. And instead, we were going to embrace what I called a summer of fun. So I mapped it out, I posted it on a bulletin board that hung in our kitchen. And there were all sorts of things in the plans. Visits with friends, a long trip to Connecticut, welcoming Gideon back from Israel, attending Noah's graduation, and then some time at the beach. Somehow we ended up doing all of those things. But Dad's enjoyment was overshadowed by his pain. And then from the beach, my brothers and I drove as quickly as we could to Johns Hopkins, and from there to Gilchrist. And even though Dad went there to die, and even though I have made that journey more times than I can count with others, the truth is I still expected my dad to live. Because in my eyes, he was invincible. And for 80 years, he was. At Gilchrist, I whispered into his ear both nights, "Dad, Aunt Judy and Uncle Frank, Grandma and Grandpa, Steve Cloper, they might be coming for you tonight with God. And if they do, you can go with them. If they come for you, it's all right if you go." It was 3:30 in the morning, our second night at Gilchrist, when those souls and God came for my dad. And now I'm here with my broken heart, still waiting 4 months later for him to come back to me. When I say the Kaddish every day, he comes back. For a short while, I can see him and hear him and be with him. My Kaddish brings him home to me. I've always felt grateful for Jewish rituals. For the 7 days after my father died, people showed up for me and for my family. The days were exhausting and they were beautiful. After that, I somehow made it through Shloshim, the 30-day mark. I rarely went out except to go to morning and evening minyans, which became the anchors of my days. I mostly sat on my porch, though, doing some work and feeling pretty lost. I have little recollection of the rest. I do remember a visit from my father's physical therapist, Leah. She had been the one to bandage his aching feet, and she spent some time in the elevator shaft with him while I was on my way to pick him up after physical therapy. Leah shared with me, "Your father told me that he was going to die soon." I asked if he was scared. He told me he wasn't. But he said he was worried about you, that you would be a mess at first, and then you would be okay. My dad was always right. It was a joke that Rafi and I always shared. He was. And I think of his words and his wisdom even now. I'll be a mess at first, and then I'll be okay. I tell myself that over and over. And I know that it is true because my dad was always right. So one of the ways that I moved from being a mess to being on the path of becoming okay was by feeling supported and cared for. This was a gift. There were a few things that even in my moments of brokenness, I won't forget. The large cup of Dunkin' Donuts tea, just the way that I like it, that a friend of mine dropped off every morning of Shiva at my house. That cup of tea brought me a much-needed moment of feeling cared for as I tried to muster the courage to face a new world and a new day. I remember a tray of fruit that someone delivered the day after Shiva ended. It was the day that the world was no longer obligated to take care of me, and this tray of fruit brought me hope that even though Shiva was over, people weren't abandoning me. I wouldn't have to make the next part of the journey alone. And then there was the small orange felt-covered heart that someone slipped into my hand when they came for a Shiva visit. That orange heart stayed with me for a long time as a source of comfort. And then there was the word Amen. Communities of people in Baltimore, California, New York, Chicago, and Portugal all said Amen to my prayers. Sometimes that Amen felt like a safety net to hold me, like a hug of support whispering in my ear, we've got you, you can do this. Sometimes that communal Amen felt like a trampoline that I imagined was boosting my Father's soul even further up in the heavens. Sometimes the Amen felt like an affirmation of my presence and my pain from a community of people who had mostly walked the path of a mourner and who understood that I needed them just as they had needed others. Some people understood the power of the word. Some have no idea how much it matters. And for all of those who said Amen to me, I feel very grateful. I chose not to send thank yous after my father died, even though I do have a beautiful embossed stationery box with my father's name on it still sitting in my dining room. The project of this magnitude felt overwhelming, but there was more to it. My soul felt so depleted, and those cards, letters, emails created this beautiful tapestry of love that was enabling me to function. And so I leaned into the tradition that was always there to guide me. No thank yous. Because what our ancient rabbis knew was that when your world has fallen apart and a part of you felt like it was missing, when you felt broken and your future felt upended, that those who can will show up to give to you. And when this happens, the job of the mourner is to just receive that love and kindness and to use it to endure. And so for the amazing community that showed up for me and shows up for others, when we barely have strength to breathe, just know that what you do makes a difference. I know that this year has been a hard year for so many of you. So many others in our community have also lost parents and spouses and siblings, cherished friends, and some parents even lost their children. Some of you are in the process of losing someone that you love. Some have lost loved ones in different ways to Alzheimer's, dementia, and other diseases that aren't marked, but rob us of the entirety of those we love. Others among us have lost other things that matter: jobs, homes, marriages, and friendships. And each of these losses is significant and profound. Each hurts our hearts in their own unique ways. And so when I started, I said that this was one of the worst years of my life, in part because my dad died, but also in part because while we were all wrestling with our personal struggles, the entire Jewish world felt like it was falling apart. October 7th brought with it a barrage of losses for all of us. For those living in Israel, it was a loss of trust in the army and intelligence that was supposed to guard them and keep them safe. There was a loss of trust in those who were supposed to be there to respond to their pleas for help. For many of us here in America on October 7th, we lost our belief in the goodness of people, in the idea that humanity at our core is good. Yes, we knew that we lived in a world where people did bad things, but bad people? People that would rape and torture and decapitate women and elders and babies and revel in their actions? No. I couldn't then, and I still can't fathom any of it. So many losses. And then came October 8th. And just when we thought the entire world would show up to offer us comfort and kindness and care, instead we suffered more losses. On that day, and in all of the days that followed, many of us lost our sense of belonging as Jews. We lost our confidence in good trumping evil, or in love being stronger than hate. We lost our hope in leaders, from leaders of countries to leaders of campuses. We lost some hope in people that we thought we could count on, who were unexpectedly silent, too scared to speak up. The things that we had relied on, a value system based on hard work, grit, effort, truth, debate, meritocracy, had disappeared. Instead, we lived in a world with fake news, multiple truths, accusations, encampments, and ideologies that were filled with hatred, all being directed at us. It felt like we were losing our minds. My daughters used to use the word gaslighting often, and I never cared much for that word. They explained to me once that it's when someone is manipulated using psychological methods to the point that they question their own sanity. That's gaslighting. This year, I finally got it. And it did feel like we were losing our sanity, like we had entered into an alternative universe, and it was a universe that I didn't like very much. So how do we do what my dad used to do so well? Take the hits and keep on going. Kohelet in the book of Ecclesiastes, which we will read this upcoming week, offers one answer. He assures us that things won't always feel this way. That is a source of advice and support and comfort. The words of Kohelet are to everything there is a season, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Kohelet tries to comfort us by reminding us that this too shall pass and that there is a season for everything. But the famous modern Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, he offers a different approach. Amichai responded to Kohelet's words with a poem that claims that actually a person doesn't have time in his or her life for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose. Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. And then Yehuda Amichai said, and so a person needs to love and to hate at the very same moment, to laugh and to cry with the very same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, all at the same time. So how do we do this? How do we hold disparate things in our hands simultaneously? Love and hate, laughter and tears, holding tight and letting go, all at the same time. Rachel Poland Goldberg showed us what that looks like. At her son Hirsch's funeral, she shared her heartbreak while also simultaneously thanking God for 23 years of getting to be Hirsch's mom. She showed us what it looks like when she refused to let hate fester even against those who had her son in the tunnels of Gaza. And she instead wrote a poem called The Tiny Seed, never giving up on the hope that there would be a mother in Gaza who would take care of her son, and that their shared tears would bridge the distance between two devastated communities. We saw what it looks like in Emily Hand's story. Emily Hand, an 11-year-old who was also taken hostage from a kibbutz on October 7th, whose sister shared that ever since Emily was released from captivity, whenever she sits down at a meal, she offers other people her food before she eats. She said that she learned this from the other hostages who always offered their rations to those among them who might have needed it more. They chose generosity and compassion even in captivity. We learned how to hold both trauma and joy at the same time through the story of Noah Argamani, who had a dance party for her rebirth day when she was released from captivity. And she explained to her family and her friends that it was less than an ideal time for her to celebrate. Her boyfriend and so many others were still being held hostage. Her friends, her neighbors, and 10,000 others were on the front lines. But she also said that she now knows more than ever the importance of celebrating each day of life as a blessing. So no, this has not yet been the best year of my life. And I imagine it has not been the best year of your life either. But I would like to suggest for all of us this year that we take from the wisdom of Kohelet and believe that this too shall pass. But until it does, that we hold on to the wisdom of Yehuda Amichai and strive to hold the blessings and the curses side by side, just as our ancestors did in the wilderness, as they chose to carry the broken tablets alongside the whole ones. As a people, we have a long journey ahead, and we will inevitably have countless battles that still await us. And so we might have no choice other than to hold on tightly to the blessings amidst the curses, to choose to smile even as we cry, to feel our strength even when we feel scared, to hold on to faith even when we feel doubt, to cherish remembering even when it hurts, and to choose to live and to love over and over and over again, even though loss is inevitable, and to always remember that even the worst years of our lives can also hold beautiful blessings. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May that be God's will for each of us. Amen.